So we're going to be taking a look at financing, and specifically residential real estate financing. Ultimately, I'm going to argue that the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage was one of the most genius financing instruments that was ever conceived, devised, or implemented anywhere in the world. But broadly speaking, I do want to say this to start. Financing, the idea of being in debt, to a lot of people carries a lot of negative connotations with it, and there's probably very good reasons for that. However, financing itself, I think, deserves to be on par with some of the great inventions of history, the wheel, fire, writing, language, because without financing, it's really only people who have accumulated wealth that are capable of doing anything at all. Whereas financing allows people who might have an idea or might have some gumption or might have some opportunities to take a chance and go ahead and do things and make dreams possible. So financing itself, I think, is one of the things that's really allowed us to build the civilization that we have today. And where you find the best systems of financing, you often find the most well-functioning civilizations. To see how beneficial smart forms of financing can be for people and societies, it actually helps us, and we have a great opportunity this month as we celebrate the 55th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act that was passed in 1968 in America, to take a look at how refusing people access or discriminating against people getting access to financing can have an effect upon those people and the generations that follow. So let's talk about that today. One of the most eye-opening aspects of my education in this industry in the over a decade that I've been involved in it is how the United States, both intentionally and with maybe some good intentions that were poorly implemented, actively discriminated against people of color in the United States when it came to access to real estate and financing for real estate. And since homeownership is the number one way that Americans have built up generational wealth, it's hurt these sectors of our society through generations. And this was done in all sorts of ways, and we'll look at a few today. But they all have their roots in something called redlining. And redlining is tied to the same process that also created what has become the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage in America. And that goes back to a program started by the federal government during the Depression years called the Federal Housing Authority. The Federal Housing Authority was intended to give banks sort of a backup that made loans on residences more secure so that they could make more of them to more people and help people build wealth in America. However, in doing it, they also developed all these maps, and they color-coded different areas in which they would do loans. They claim this is based upon risk, but the areas that were drawn in red lines as the highest risk areas seem to all include black neighborhoods. So when potential buyers in these neighborhoods couldn't get loans for properties to buy, obviously it doesn't help the value of those properties grow. So houses in this area were worth less money, and it became sort of a cycle of itself. And you end up with areas and neighborhoods where you don't get any home or property value built up, and the neighborhoods themselves start to decay. Now, the Fair Housing Act in the late 60s and some things that the government did in the 70s tried to clean up some of these unfair lending practices. However, there was a lingering phenomenon, and this goes up even into the modern day, which has been harder to eradicate, and that's a process called racial steering. And that's when real estate agents, based upon a person's race, try to direct them to the neighborhoods that they should be living in. Now, racial steering has been illegal since the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but it's been much more difficult to eradicate than simply to make it illegal. And there are other things that go on as well. For instance, some studies have found that Black American homeowners with pictures in their house that show they're Black American homeowners get lower appraisals on the same house than white homeowners, which in markets where people are dependent upon mortgages and appraisals at value for those mortgages in order to sell their house, hurts the sellers immensely. And those are just a few examples. The fact of the matter is, there's been a lot over the course of 100 years that relates to this issue, and it adds up so that even today, there are still lingering effects across generations. I think at this point, at least from a legal perspective, a lot of the right rules are in place, and I think on the ground, a lot of the right practices have been adopted by people. I don't think there's as much active, intentional racism necessarily going on, but there are subconscious biases. The appraisal examples are really, really good. And I think we need to take steps to safeguard in order to get a lot of these practices out of the way. Because as we're going to see in the next few weeks, access to financing and access to real estate is something that, when it comes to families moving ahead over time, has been more important than maybe anything else in America. So in April, we celebrate the Fair Housing Act, and we should. And it's a reminder that we've come a long way, that we have a lot of sins lingering in our past, and that we have a lot of work to do if we really want to get to where we need